They called her the Burden. It was not her name, but it was the only one she had known for years. It clung to her like the scent of wood smoke and old sorrow. At the trading post, the dust swirled in greasy eddies, coating everything in a film of grit. Her father's voice was loud, full of false cheer that didn't quite cover the sour edge of desperation. He gestured to her with a sweep of his hand, as if presenting a prize sow at market. Strong girl, he boomed to the assembled trappers and traders, men whose eyes slid over her with casual cruelty. Good for work. Eats a bit much, but earns her keep. It was a lie. In her father's eyes, she had never earned her keep. She was just another mouth, and a large one at that. Her two brothers stood behind him, smirking. Their contempt was a familiar blanket, heavy and suffocating. She kept her eyes fixed on a loose board in the floor, counting the knots in the wood. It was a game she played to keep from screaming, to keep the tears from falling. Each knot was a stone she swallowed, adding to the weight in her belly. A man with a greasy beard spat a brown stream of tobacco juice near her worn boots. What's wrong with her? She got the slow mind. Her father laughed, a harsh, barking sound. Nah, just quiet. And solid. Built like a brick house, this 1 inch. He slapped her shoulder, a gesture that was meant to look affectionate but was hard enough to make her stumble. She didn't flinch. She had learned long ago that flinching only invited more pain. For a week, they had tried to trade her. To any man heading west, to any farmer needing a field hand, to any lonely trapper looking for a wife. There were no takers. She was too large, they said. Too plain. Her silence was mistaken for stupidity. She was an object to be bartered, and no one was buying. A man sat alone in the corner, away from the loud bragging and haggling. He had been watching, not her, but the men around her. He was a settler, a widower by the name of Silas, known for his silence and the solitude of his homestead deep in the forested hills. He had said nothing all day. Now, he rose. He was not a tall man, but he moved with a quiet certainty that made others take notice. The room hushed slightly as he approached her father. He didn't look at her. His gaze was fixed on her father's shifty eyes. What do you want for her? Silas asked. His voice was low and rough, like stones grinding together. Her father's eyes lit with greed. A fine girl like this? She's worth a good rifle, a few traps. Silas cut him off with a slight shake of his head. He gestured to a crate of supplies he had assembled. Flour, salt, beans, a new axe head, and 2 bottles of whiskey. My supplies, he said, his voice flat. And I take her. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a statement of fact. Her brothers snickered. All that for her? It was more than they'd hoped for. Her father tried to hide his glee. He spat on his palm. Done. The deal was sealed. No one asked her name. No one looked her in the eye. She was a line item in a transaction, the final piece of a trade for whiskey and an axe. Her father shoved her forward. She's yours. Silas looked at her then, for the first time. His eyes were the color of a stormy sky, deep and unreadable. She braced herself for the look of disgust, of ownership, of cruel intent. She saw none of it. He simply looked at her, a long, steady gaze that seemed to pass right through the layers of dirt and shame and see something deeper inside. He gave a slight nod, not to her father, but to her. Then he turned and gathered his things. He did not speak. He did not touch her. He simply started walking toward the door, expecting her to follow. For a moment, she was frozen. The trading post, with all its familiar cruelty, was the only world she knew. The man walking away was a stranger, the wilderness he was headed for, an unknown terror. But then her brother gave her a rough shove. Go on, you fat cow. You belong to him now. That shove was the only farewell she received. She took one last look at the men who were her blood, already opening one of the whiskey bottles, their laughter echoing behind her. Then she turned her back on them and followed the silent man into the vast, unforgiving frontier, a burden traded for a pittance, a ghost leaving a life that was never truly hers. The journey was a silent one. The world shrank to the rhythmic plodding of the mule's hooves and the steady, quiet presence of the man walking beside it. Silas had placed her on the animal, loading their few supplies around her. He himself walked, his stride long and even, never seeming to tire. He had not spoken a single word to her since leaving the trading post. The silence was a heavy thing at first, thick with her fear and uncertainty. She expected him to command her, to mock her, to treat her with the same casual brutality she had always known. Every time he stopped, her body tensed, waiting for a blow or a harsh command. But it never came. When they paused to eat, he would hand her a piece of dried jerky and a biscuit, the exact same portion he took for himself. He would gesture for her to drink from the water skin first. At night, he laid out 2 bedrolls on opposite sides of the small fire. He gave her the thicker one, the one made of wool, while he took the thinner, worn canvas for himself. He never tried to touch her. He rarely even looked at her directly. His gaze was always on the trail ahead, on the trees, on the sky, as if reading a language she did not understand. In the oppressive world of men she had known, a man's attention was a dangerous thing. It meant he wanted something from you, something he would take by force if necessary. Silas's lack of attention was a strange and unsettling gift. It was a form of respect she had never been shown. It was as if he were giving her space to simply exist, to breathe without fear of judgment or violation. She watched him from beneath her lashes. He was a man of immense capability. He moved through the wilderness with an easy confidence, reading tracks in the dirt, identifying birds by their calls, finding clean water where she saw only mud. His hands, though calloused and rough, were deft and sure as he set a snare or sharpened his knife. He was self-contained, a world unto himself. He did not need her. This was the most terrifying and liberating thought she had ever had. Her family had always defined her by her use, or lack thereof. She was a useless mouth to feed, a burden to be carried. This man, however, seemed to require nothing from her. He had taken her on, but for what purpose? The question echoed in the silent chambers of her heart. Was this some crueler game? A longer, slower path to the same inevitable pain? One evening, a cold rain began to fall. He quickly built a lean-to against a rock outcropping, using his own oilskin tarp. It was small, barely large enough for one person to lie down comfortably. He gestured for her to get inside, out of the rain. She hesitated, looking from the small shelter to the darkening, rain-soaked woods. He waited, his expression unreadable in the failing light. When she didn't move, he simply took his bedroll, placed it under the driest part of the overhang, and then took his own seat by the fire, pulling his hat low and letting the rain slick down his back. He was giving her the shelter. All of it. Without a word. Slowly, cautiously, she crawled inside. She lay there, dry and relatively warm, listening to the hiss of the rain on the fire and the steady sound of his breathing just a few feet away. For the first time in her life, she felt a flicker of something other than fear. It was a fragile, tentative thing, like a winter sprout pushing through frozen ground. It was the first inkling of trust. She did not know his destination, and she did not know his intent, but she knew that this silent, stoic man had shown her more kindness in 3 days than her own family had shown her in a lifetime. His cabin was small, nestled in a clearing carved from the heart of a dense pine forest. It was built of sturdy, hand-hewn logs, with a stone chimney and a roof of packed earth and sod. Smoke curled from the chimney, a thin, grey ribbon against the vast blue sky. It looked solid. It looked safe. When they arrived, Silas slid the packs from the mule and then, for the first time, gestured for her to dismount. He led her to the door and pushed it open. The inside was sparse but impeccably clean. A single room held a rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, a stone fireplace, and a bed built into one corner. But on the other side of the room, a thick blanket was hung, partitioning off a small alcove. He pointed toward it. "Yours," he said. It was the first word he had spoken directly to her in over a week. She pushed the blanket aside. Behind it was a small cot with a fresh mattress stuffed with straw and a clean, folded quilt. A small crate stood on its end as a nightstand. It was a tiny space, but it was a space just for her. An anchor in the swirling sea of her life. She had never had a door to close, a space that belonged only to her. A blanket was almost as good. As she stood there, overwhelmed, he placed a small, neatly folded pile on the cot. It was a dress. Not new, but clean and mended, made of soft, faded blue calico. It was simple, sturdy, and generously cut. He had thought of her. He had prepared for her. He left her there, behind the curtain, and she heard the sounds of him unpacking, stoking the fire, the quiet, efficient noises of a man at home in his world. She slowly shed the filthy, ragged dress she had worn for weeks, the uniform of her shame. She washed herself with the basin of warm water he had left for her and put on the blue dress. It fit. She felt, not beautiful, not yet. But she felt clean. She felt human. The days fell into a rhythm, as steady and quiet as Silas himself. He would rise before the sun, and the smell of coffee and frying bacon would wake her. They ate their meals in silence at the small table. He would nod to her, then leave for the day to hunt or check his trap lines or clear more land. She was left with the cabin. At first, she did not know what to do. No one gave her orders. No one watched her with critical eyes. Hesitantly, she began to make the space her own. She swept the floor, washed their few dishes, and tended the small, struggling garden patch behind the cabin. She found his mending basket, full of torn shirts and socks, and her needle flew, making small, neat stitches that were nearly invisible. She was a good seamstress. No one had ever told her that. She found a satisfaction in the work, in making something whole again. She was good with her hands. She discovered this about herself in the quiet solitude of the cabin. Weeks turned into months. Winter came, blanketing the world in a profound silence. They were isolated, just the two of them in a world of white. The silence between them changed. It was no longer empty or awkward. It became a shared space, a comfortable quiet filled with unspoken understanding. One evening, as she sat by the fire, mending one of his gloves, he got up and returned from his workbench. He placed a small block of soft pine wood and his own whittling knife on the table in front of her. He said nothing. He simply sat back down and watched the fire. It was an offering. An invitation. Her hands trembled as she picked up the knife and the wood. She had never been allowed to use a knife for anything but peeling potatoes. She thought of the birds she watched every day at the edge of the clearing, the small, feisty sparrows that survived the harshest winters. She began to carve. The wood peeled away in thin curls, and slowly, a shape emerged. It wasn't perfect. It was a little clumsy, a little rough. But it was unmistakably a bird. A small, fat sparrow, its head cocked as if listening. When she was done, she set it on the table, her heart pounding. Silas leaned forward. He picked it up, turning it over and over in his large, calloused hands. He ran his thumb over its smooth, carved belly. He did not smile, but the corner of his mouth twitched. He stood and placed her carving on the center of the mantelpiece, giving it the place of honor. He had seen her. He had seen the small, sturdy, resilient thing she had created, and he had valued it. After that, he often left wood for her. Her flock of wooden birds grew on the mantel. A hawk, a wren, a bluebird. Each one a piece of her soul, given form. One day, he returned not with wood, but with a piece of smoothed antler. He handed it to her. She spent a week carving it, her most intricate work yet. A comb. Strong and fine-toothed, with a handle carved into the shape of a feather. She used it that night, drawing it through her long, thick hair, which she had begun to wash and brush until it shone. When she emerged from behind her curtain, he looked up, and for the first time, his eyes lingered on her. He looked at her hair, at the comb, at her face. And in his gaze, there was no pity, no ownership. There was a quiet, profound appreciation. In his silence, he was telling her she was beautiful. And for the first time in her life, she believed it. The thaw of the second spring brought more than just wildflowers to the forest floor. It brought visitors. Unwanted. Unwelcome. She was outside, hanging laundry on a line strung between two pines, when she heard them. The sound of loud voices, of horses trampling carelessly through the undergrowth. A cold dread, a feeling she had almost forgotten, washed over her. She turned and saw them. Her father and her two brothers, looking fatter and more prosperous than she remembered. A good year's harvest had filled their bellies and their pockets, but it had not changed the cruelty in their eyes. Her father's gaze swept over the tidy cabin, the cleared field, the stack of winter wood, and landed on her. A sneer twisted his lips. Well, well. Look what the cat dragged in. Seems the widower has put you to good use. She froze, the wet sheet clutched in her hands. The blue calico dress suddenly felt flimsy, no armor at all against this old, familiar poison. Her brother, Luke, laughed. He must be desperate, poor. Still as wide as a barn door, the words were meant to crumble her, to reduce her back to the burden, the worthless object they had discarded. And they almost worked. The old shame rose like bile in her throat. She felt herself shrinking, her eyes darting to the ground. Then the cabin door opened. Silas stepped out. He didn't have a rifle in his hands. He held nothing. He simply stood on the porch, his feet planted, his body as solid and unmovable as the mountains behind him. He looked at the men, then his eyes found hers. He didn't look angry or afraid. He looked expectant. He was watching her, waiting. He was not going to fight her battle for her. He was going to stand with her while she fought it herself. It was the greatest act of trust he had ever shown her. Her father puffed out his chest, stepping forward. We've come for our property, settler. We had a deal, but times have changed. We'll be taking her back. Silas did not respond to him. His gaze remained on her. In that moment, she understood. He was giving her the choice. He was giving her the voice she had never been allowed to have. She looked at her father, at the greed and contempt in his face. She looked at her brothers, their expressions a mixture of mockery and envy. And she felt not fear, but a cold, clear anger. These men were not her family. They were her captors, and she had been set free. She dropped the sheet and took a step forward. Her voice, when it came, was quiet, but it cut through the air like a shard of ice. I am not your property. Her father blinked, taken aback. What did you say, girl? She took another step, her chin lifting. I said, I am not yours. She looked directly into his eyes, something she had never dared to do. You never were my father. You were my owner. And you sold me. You traded me for whiskey and an axe head. The deal is done. Now you listen here, her brother Luke snarled, taking a threatening step toward her. Before he could take a second, Silas moved. He didn't rush. He simply shifted his weight, a subtle, fluid motion that brought him from the porch to stand directly beside her. He was a silent wall of promise. A promise of violence so swift and final that Luke froze mid-stride, his bravado evaporating like mist. The air crackled with tension. But the final blow would not be physical. It would be hers. She stood taller, feeling the solid strength of Silas beside her, a strength that was now also inside of her. This is my home, she declared, her voice ringing with a newfound power. This man is my husband. She looked from her father's stunned face to her brother's cowed expressions. My name, she said, each word a stone laid in the foundation of her new life, is Ilara. And you will leave this place. Now they stared at her. They saw not the burden, not the meek, shuffling creature they had sold. They saw a woman. Strong. Unbreakable. A stranger. Her father opened his mouth, then closed it again. There was nothing left to say. There was no purchase to be found here. With muttered curses, they turned, mounted their horses, and rode away, their loud departure a pathetic attempt to reclaim the power they had just lost. They vanished back into the trees, and the forest fell silent again. The only sound was the gentle breeze whispering through the pines. Ilara stood, trembling, not with fear, but with the aftershock of her own strength. Then, she felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Silas. His touch was warm, firm, grounding. It said everything he never could with words. You are safe. You are strong. You are home. A gentle snow was falling outside, each flake a soft kiss on the window pane. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled, casting a warm, golden glow on the room that was now unequivocally a home. The mantelpiece was crowded with her small, carved birds, a silent flock that had witnessed her transformation. In the corner, a cradle, also carved by Silas's hands, rocked gently. Ilara sat in a rocking chair, a quilt over her lap, a book open in her hands. Her belly was round with their first child. She was no longer just the woman who cooked and cleaned, she was the heart of this small world. She had filled the cabin with not just order, but with life. She planted flowers in the summer, hung dried herbs from the rafters, and filled the quiet evenings by reading aloud from the few books Silas owned. Her voice, once trapped in her throat, was now clear and steady. Silas sat across from her, cleaning his rifle, his movements efficient and familiar. He rarely looked up, but she knew he was listening. He was always listening. He stopped his work and watched her, a rare, soft expression on his face. He looked around the room, at the neatly stacked wood, the simmering pot on the hearth, the cradle waiting patiently. His gaze came back to her, to the gentle swell of her stomach, to the peaceful look on her face. You made this a home, Ilara, he said. His voice was rough, but it held a universe of feeling. It was the most he had ever said at once, and it was more than enough. She looked up from her book, a slow, genuine smile spreading across her face. The girl who had been traded for whiskey was gone. The woman who sat before him was built of resilience and quiet strength. She had been found in the wilderness, not lost to it. Here, in this small cabin, surrounded by a vast and sometimes brutal world, she had discovered she was not a burden to be endured, but a treasure to be cherished. She was not loved in spite of her scars, or her past, or the shape of her body. She was loved because of them. Because they were part of the tapestry of who she was, an Ilara. A survivor. A creator. A wife. A mother. A woman who had finally, truly been seen. The world had tried to define her by her weight, to measure her worth in curses and coins. But one quiet man had measured her worth in respect, in trust, and in the silent offering of a block of wood. And in doing so, he had given her the one tool she needed to carve out a life of her own. Please like, share, and subscribe to support more true-hearted stories on True Frontier Tales. If you had seen her there, standing in the dust of that trading post, would you have stepped in too? Tell us in the comments.